Number 10. The Strangely Stricken Dead. A short Korean ghost story, the tale of the strangely stricken dead is one which has disturbing social implications for how prolifically it has spread. The story goes that the friend of the long-dead General Kim awakens, having dreamed of seeing General Kim riding a horse, armed with a bow and arrow. The friend asks where General Kim is going, and he responds that a thief has entered his home, and he is going to shoot him. He then returns with bloody arrows, claiming that the deed has been done. Disturbed by the dream, the friend goes to visit General Kim's surviving wife, and learns that she was planning to remarry, but upon her new husband entering her home, he was stricken with a heart attack. As fairy tales generally are meant to have morals, this one seems a little dark for me. Claiming that wives should never remarry, it's pretty gross, but equally as indicative of social leanings at that time. Number 9. Kikimora. This tale comes from Slavic myths and is pretty darn creepy. See, the Kikimora is a house spirit that acts in relation to the morality of their master or homeowner. Most people aren't directly aware of their Kikimoras, but nevertheless, these spirits have certain ways of making themselves known. Generally described as thin, goblin-esque creatures, Kikimoras are notorious for their habits of kidnapping and drowning their victims. One of their more cruel activities is where they sit on the chest of their sleeping victims. This could have been used as a way to explain the effects of sleep paralysis at the time, or even worse, sleep apnea, which can frequently take the lives of sleeping people before they even know they have it. Number 8. Rapunzel. I'm certain most folks already know most of the aspects of this German tale. A woman with an extraordinarily long set of hair is locked away in a tower with no entrance or exit aside from a single window. Whoever climbs the tower gets to marry her. Simple stuff. The thing is, this story actually has a basis in reality, and it isn't pretty. Looking through the history books, there's an eerily similar story about a woman named Saint Barbara who was exceptionally beautiful. Her father, Dioscorus, tried to hide her away from every single man. A pagan, Dioscorus was horrified to discover that his daughter had become Christian when he decided to let her out, but only to meet other women. He then beheaded her, only for himself to be struck by lightning. How's that for divine retribution? Number 7. Father Frost. A Russian fairy tale, Father Frost is similar to another story you might have heard, but also wildly different. A woman has 2 daughters, one she loves and one she hates. She orders her husband to lead the daughter she hates out into the forest in the middle of winter, which he does. Found by Father Frost, this daughter turns out to be exceptionally kind, and for her kindness, she is rewarded with jewels. When the kind daughter returns with the finery, the woman sends her other daughter out to get more. But that daughter is cruel to Father Frost, so he just leaves her there to die. That's it, that's the entire story. You know, don't be a jerk. Number 6. The Goose Girl. Another grim story, the Goose Girl is pretty weird and brutal. As a princess and her maid are traveling together, the maid just kind of goes nuts and threatens to off the princess unless they swap places. So the princess just agrees, and then they do this little song and dance routine for a while where she's like sworn to an oath of secrecy, then breaks the oath by talking to the king and telling the king that she's actually a princess, but she doesn't break that oath because she was actually talking to an iron stove and the king was just listening. Whatever. The point is that the maid is then punished by being dragged around town naked inside of a barrel with inward-facing spikes until she bites the dust. Number 5. Mulan. It would be nice to pretend that Mulan was a super chill story and everything was all hunky-dory like in the Disney movie, but man did the original bite. The effective idea was that it was somehow preparing women for life in feudal China, and it did a pretty good job of ensuring that everyone understood that life in feudal China just kind of sucked. First, she gets married off to a random dude at 13, yikes. Then she joins the war, but they lose, so she goes home and finds out that her father has passed away and her mother has remarried, and she's basically just going to be a concubine. So then she just takes her own life and her heart is mailed to the emperor that lost. Number 4. Koschei the Deathless. What would you do with immortality? Learn about the world, dedicate your life to mastering the arts, attempt to cure incurable diseases. Well, Koche the Deathless decided that he'd spend his entire life mastering the art of being a massive jerk. Discovering a spell that would let him hide his soul within an object, Koche would then run out into the world and try to steal people's wives. That is all he did. Sun up to sundown, just go around and go, hey, you got a wife? Gimme. But there are a bunch of different tales starring this long-lived lowlife, and almost every single one of them features him as the villain. Some have him set up little situations where the hero will revive him, and then he'll do this whole got your nose bit, except the nose is the girl that you're crushing on, and he isn't joking. Interestingly, he never wins, but also can never seem to completely die. I think the only one where he comes close is the time that he turns a girl that doesn't like him into a snake. I don't know, man, the dude's just weird. Number 3. The Little Mermaid. So the premise is simple, you know the deal. The mermaid sees man and goes, wowie zowie, give me some of that. She makes a bad deal to go and meet her love, and then is faced with a choice. See, where the movie ends is with a bunch of fish chilling out and an octopus getting speared in a way that is shockingly brutal for a G-rated flick. The original is a little bit more cold. See, one of the original ideas for the mermaid is the siren, which is sort of a monster that lures sailors to their ends. Being one and the same in mythology, the original Little Mermaid was basically going to do the same thing to Herbo, but then realized that she didn't really want to, so she just took her own life instead. Some stories end with her getting a second chance because God's all like, nice bro, but it's pretty dark. Number 2. The Story of Sigurd. Okay, this is a long one, and I do not have anything close to the amount of time needed to properly summarize this. See, The Ring Cycle, an opera based on this story, clocks in at about 15 hours, and because I am a cultured little boy, I've actually seen the entire thing. Either way, some highlights. Sigurd's parents are siblings. Ew. A dwarf curses a ring, a Valkyrie falls in love with Sigurd when he's like 5, also ew. He then grows up under a weird dad who isn't his dad, and then goes off to rescue this Valkyrie because her dad imprisoned her with a dragon, so he rescues her, and then they just both burn alive. The opera is cool, the story's just weird. Number 1. Brer Rabbit. Okay, so Brer Rabbit is a story with some weight. See, these stories have been passed around for a while, so I've gotta break it to everyone that their origins are really, really dark. See, the whole idea of a little rabbit running around and getting into trouble is nice. I actually grew up with a bunch of variants of these stories, so did my mom, and one of my favorite toys as a kid was a rabbit doll. So, anyways, these stories were written by African slaves who were trying to adapt stories from various African cultures into forms that could give them hope under the brutal reign of their scummy masters. Most of the Brer Rabbit stories can be traced back to the Akan stories of and a Donko, a trickster spider, and rabbit, respectively. These were eventually co-opted by a bunch of white people who ended up making the Song of the South, a pretty screwed up film that has a lot of racism. Not much else to say there, it's just, there you go.
In our number 10 spot, we have Snow White. I'm sure you will all remember the infamous tale about Snow White and the 7 Dwarves. Snow White's stepmother, the evil queen, was jealous of Snow White's beauty, and so she creates a plan to poison Snow with an apple. Well, apparently this tale has been washed down quite a lot, as the original tale is said to be a lot more, well, kinda inappropriate. The evil queen not only wants Snow dead in the original, but she also wants her liver and lung to be served for dinner. So the evil queen is a cannibal. Well, I can see why they wanted to change the story up a bit. In the origin story, the queen is forced to dance to her death wearing hot iron shoes. Yeah, that definitely is a reflection of the time this story was written in. Also, apparently Snow White isn't awoken by true love's kiss, but actually by the bumpy ride on the horse's back as the prince is carrying Snow back to the castle. Perhaps the executive decision to change the story really was such a good call. If you like this video, don't forget to smash that like button, as it will really help us out. In our number 9 spot, we have Rapunzel. Okay, obviously Rapunzel was going to make make it on this list because, well, the whole premise of her story is her being stolen from her family and locked in a tower. Already a very terrifying story when you think about it. But actually, the Brothers Grimm version is way more terrifying. Rapunzel gets taken and held in a tower and one day invites a prince into it and she gets pregnant. After she begins to complain that her clothes are too tight around her belly, the witch who stole her chops off her hair and sends her away, disposes of her. The prince, returning to see Rapunzel, gets thrown off the tower and is blinded by thorny bushes. He eventually finds his family after wandering around for a while. Yikes. Well, certainly having the princess be pregnant and sent away for being pregnant is quite horrific and scandalous, so it makes sense as to why that small detail was erased. In our number 8 spot, we have The Little Mermaid. The original story of The Little Mermaid is terrifying. The Little Mermaid took her own life. After doing research for this, I now know that this version is the original. She took her own life because she was heartbroken because the prince married someone else. So sad. She jumps through hoops for him and even thinks about killing him before she jumps into the ocean and takes her own life. Honestly, I can see why some moms are cautious about this tale. In our number 7 spot, we have Pinocchio. Apparently in the origin story, Pinocchio kills Jiminy. What? And he sells the book that Geppetto gets by selling his last coat. While researching, I also learned that the structure of the story kind of follows the stories of peasants at the time and how they would venture out into the world but were naively unprepared for what they would find, and this was due to the industrialization of Italy. Interesting stuff. Side note, whenever I hear the name Pinocchio, I can't help but to say it like Geppetto does. Pinocchio! In our number 6 spot, we have The Princess and the Frog. There are a few versions of The Princess and the Frog, and they may surprise you to hear. Although after hearing The Little Mermaid's dark past, possibly not. This Disney movie is not very much like its original counterpart, The Frog Prince. In The Frog Prince, we still have the lovely princess that kisses the frog, but she is deeply disgusted by the frog for tricking her into making a deal, and apparently she throws the Frog Prince against the wall and breaks his spell. There is also another version where she cuts the frog's head off, and then another version where the frog tries to sleep on her pillow, which makes no sense to me. I suppose I would have to see it, but it sure sounds creepy. The one where she chops her head off though, damn, that is intense. I'm glad they took that out of the Disney version because I feel like that would have definitely changed the vibe of the film. In our number 5 spot, we have Frozen. Okay guys, I'm going to tell you about the origins of Frozen, but then I want you to let it go. The Snow Queen in the origin story is actually evil and takes a young boy and keeps him with her power and will only free him if he solves a puzzle and spells the word eternity. I don't understand. Then a girl with a heart filled with love comes and saves the boy with her power of true love. So not quite the story about sisterly love, but it is about romantic love, so possibly not too far from the point of Disney's Frozen. That love is so much more powerful than fear. In our number 4 spot, we have Sleeping Beauty. Another dark fairy tale for you. This is sort of the origin of Sleeping Beauty. Never one of my favorites, to be honest. The dress was, for sure. I love anything pink. Anyways, apparently in the origin story, the prince's mother was part ogre. Yeah, that shocked me too. But not only that, she wanted to eat Sleeping Beauty for dinner because she was an ogre. Apparently also in the origin, Sleeping Beauty wakes up from her long sleep because one of her twins is eating her finger or sucking on her finger because she apparently conceived and gave birth to twins while sleeping. It's all deeply disturbing and I wish I could unlearn this one. In our number 3 spot, we have Beauty and the Beast. The classic tale of Beauty and the Beast is one that touched the hearts of many when Disney put out their version. But like every other fairy tale on this list, there were many parts that were altered for the PG Disney versions. For example, in the origin, the Beast was actually put under a spell by a dark fairy who fails to seduce him. Honestly, that makes sense. A woman scorned is a scary thing. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. is a popular phrase for a reason. Apparently the Beast takes pure Belle and forces her to have her hands chopped off by threatening to take her father. Apparently there is also another version where she chops her own hands off so that she is not as attractive to her brother or father. Yeah, I'm super uncomfortable. In our number 2 spot we have Cinderella. The origins of my favorite fairy tale, Cinderella, are kind of all over the place. There are so many versions of Cindy, as this is one of the most used plot lines in movies, TV, and books. But some of the oldest versions definitely have a few dark twists and turns. In the Brothers Grimm, doves are sent to Cindy from heaven and the doves peck their eyes out. I don't understand. Just why? Apparently the evil stepsisters cut off their toes to fit in the shoes. Now that's commitment. And in one version, Cinderella kills her stepmother. Apparently there is a version where Cinderella escapes her incestuous father, and that is just too much for me. Thank God for Disney's version. My childhood wouldn't have been the same without Gus Gus the Mouse. I just love that name. In our number 1 spot we have Goldilocks and the Three Bears. This is a story that I'm sure you have heard plenty of times in your life, if you were born in North America at least. There once was a golden-haired girl that stumbled upon a cottage with 3 beds, 3 porches, and basically 3 everything. Plot spoiler, it's the home of 3 bears, who discover her sleeping in the bed. And some, she befriends them and stays for dinner. Well, in the Robert Southey's version, Goldilocks is actually an old woman, and when the bears discover her, she jumps out of the window and falls to her death. Apparently there is another version where the bears eat her, naturally.
Kicking it off with number 10, we have the Tinderbox. Now, this has nothing to do with the dating app Tinder, so don't even think about it. This story is about a soldier who encounters an ugly old witch on his journey home from war. This witch gives the soldier a quest to climb up a tree that has her grandmother's tinderbox at the top of it. However, guarding the box are 3 dogs, each with different sized eyes. Each dog was guarding a different box that had treasure. The first box had copper, the second had silver, and the last had gold. However, when he reached the trunk with the gold coins, he threw away all the other coins and just kept all the gold ones. Not a smart businessman, I may say. Anyways, he then refused to turn over the gold and, well, like any other happy fairy tale, he cuts off the witch's head. He then used this gold until he struck poverty. Told you, not a good businessman. One day he struck the tinderbox and the dogs appeared asking him what he wished for. So like genies, but in the form of dogs. He asked for wealth. He receives it and then wishes to find a princess to wed. The story continues on with him fighting the queen, who denies him from seeing the princess, and him using the dogs and his wishes to try and get the princess. Now this fairy tale has a more darker ending. The dogs go to rescue the soldier, who ended up in jail for trying to court the princess. The dogs kill the guards, king, and queen, and the soldier and the princess live happily ever after. What a truly happy ending. Well, for some people. In our 9th spot, we have the Red Shoes. So this fairy tale revolves around a girl named Karen. In fact, Anderson named this character after his half-sister who he wasn't too fond of. Basically, Karen is an orphan who receives a pair of red shoes as a gift. Now she loves these fancy looking red shoes so much that she wears them everywhere, even to church, where it was a sin to wear red. But that didn't stop her, and she continued to wear her red shoes to church. Like, dang, were they like Louis Vuittons or something? I don't know. Anyways, as a punishment, she was cursed and forced to dance unceasingly for the rest of her life. Imagine that, like, oh gosh guys, here comes Karen, and she's all like, hey guys, what's up? Not a fun time. Now Karen, tired of having to dance all the time, calls on someone's manager and complains. Just kidding. She actually comes up with a solution and gets her feet cut off with an axe. Oof. Yikes. Coming in with number 8, we have the Naughty Boy. Now, this poem is loosely based off of Cupid. In Roman mythology, Cupid is the son of Venus, who is the goddess of love. But this story doesn't retell the classic story of Cupid. This fairy tale starts with an old poet who is at home one day writing, well, poems. When all of a sudden there was a banging at the door and a small, bare, wet, cold little boy appears. He had long, golden, curly hair and he carried a bow and arrow with him. Regardless of him being armed, the old man lets the boy in, and the boy says his name is Cupid. The old man makes the small boy some food and nurses him back to good health. Then little Cupid shoots the man in the heart. The old man is filled with pain and yells out at Cupid, calling him a naughty boy. From then, Cupid continues to go around town shooting people in the heart with arrows, except they're just filled with pain and not for love with each other. This definitely is an interesting take on Cupid. In 7th place, we have the Rose Elf. Elves are cute little mythical creatures, right? We have the house elves like Dobby from Harry Potter, or even the cute little elves that help Santa during Christmas. However, the elf in this fairy tale may not be as friendly as you think. This story is about a small elf that resides inside a rose. This elf was out wandering one night when he encountered a beautiful young woman and her lover. The couple are saying their goodbyes as he was sent out on a quest by the woman's brother. A little confusing, I know. So this elf ends up inside a rose that the man takes with him on his travels. However, the woman's brother ends up murdering him and hiding the body. The elf witnessed this all and told the woman. The woman then digs up her lover's head and plants a jasmine bush on top of it. The brother then takes the jasmine bush and, well, the elves that lived inside the bush then get even and murder the brother. For our number 6 story, we have The Girl Who Stepped on Bread. This fairy tale surrounds a girl named Inger. Now Inger was pretty, but she was a vain, poor brat who worked as a maid in a big rich house. One day she was sent home from work with a big loaf of bread. However, as Inger travels home, she encountered a big puddle. Not wanting to ruin her clothes, she decides to do what anyone else would do, and she throws a loaf of bread down as a stepping stone. Seriously, you couldn't have just walked around it? You just wasted perfectly good bread. However, karma hits her fast, because as soon as she stepped on that bread, she sunk down into a witch's bog. The witch told her that she would live among the witch covered in mud and bugs until she dies. Some days Inger would feel teardrops on her head from her mom mourning over her daughter. Days go by and Inger is finally sent to heaven when she acknowledges her sins and bad behavior. This all happened because of a loaf of bread. We are now halfway with The Shadow. Now, in this fairy tale, a person's shadow isn't just the dark shape projected on the ground, but instead it has a personality of its own. Now, this story involves a philosopher whose shadow leaves him to explore an intriguing looking balcony. Beats me how a balcony can be intriguing, like, ooh, look at those rails and the stable structure, ah. Anyways, the philosopher's shadow never returns until years later. Apparently, the balcony led to the House of Poetry. His shadow became extremely knowledgeable in poetry, and he even became rich and famous. However, since the shadow is indeed a shadow and not a human, he asked the philosopher to keep the secret between them. Eventually, the philosopher becomes ill, so the shadow takes him on a nice little spa retreat. Aww, how sweet of him. However, at the spa, this shadow falls in love and decides to murder the philosopher. He got away with it too, since people thought that the shadow was the real human and that the philosopher was just the shadow. In 4th place, we have the tale called Under the Willow Tree. This story is about 2 kids, Nud and Joanna. They grew up together, having their parents being close friends and being good neighbors. They often would hang out and talk about stories or songs. Years later, they started to drift apart. He became a shoemaker and she became a singer. Now, Nud had always had feelings for Joanna and finally confesses this to her. And she states that he thinks of him as a sibling. Ouch. Apparently being friend-zoned was even a thing back in 1853. She eventually moves back to France, but Nud follows her there. This time, however, she is engaged. Ouch again. He continues to wander Europe until he stumbles among a willow tree. He eventually falls asleep under the tree and dreams about her loving him back. Whilst among this dream, Nud freezes to his death. Definitely not the most uplifting story, that's for sure. For number 3, we have The Professor and the Flea. This story was written in April of 1873 and is one of the weirdest love stories I have read. The story surrounds a professor that would fly in a hot air balloon until one day he crashed it. He no longer could make any money because of it, and his wife left him, leaving him alone with just a flea. However, he decided to start teaching the flea to perform. He dressed him up in a little tiny outfit and taught him tricks like being shot out of a cannon. One day they were performing in front of a princess who, after seeing the flea's daring cannon trick, fell in love. I mean, who wouldn't? Daredevil. Ooh. She ordered him to live with her and even took a strand of her hair and made the professor tie it on the flea's leg so that she could attach the flea to her earring and have him, you know, just chill there as she... Weird. Now, the professor didn't like how the princess stole his moneymaker and friend, so he decided to trick the princess into letting him fly away in a hot air balloon, in which he took his flea friend back and used it to escape. In our 2nd spot, we have the story of a mother. Now, this fairy tale is one of Han's more darker ones. This story surrounds a caring mother, fearful of her sick child's death. One day as the mother was tending to her child, an old man enters the home. The old man was Death himself, who stole her child away when his mother was sleeping. Now, this mother was not going down without a fight, so she went after death. Along her journey to save her baby, she encountered numerous figures that would only let her pass for something in return. The night figure made her sing, the rose bush drained her heart of blood, the lake took her eyes, and a woman took her hair. After sacrificing these parts of herself, she finally reaches Death, who is tending to his flowers. You know, just the usual thing Death is known to do. Now these flowers actually represent the souls of the children that he has collected. The mother fights to get her child back, but Death claims that he is doing her a favor, as her child would have endured much more suffering. The woman is then satisfied knowing her child is at peace and returns home. The end. We are now at our number 1 spot with Claude Hans. This story is about a competition between 3 brothers to figure out who is the wittiest and who will woo the heart of a princess, since she only wants to marry the wittiest in the kingdom. Now, 2 of the brothers were really extra and both thought that they could woo the princess for different reasons. The older brother knew the Latin dictionary by heart, as well as he memorized the town newspaper for the last 3 years. The other brother memorized all of the guild laws and regulations. How attractive. Anyways, they both set out on their horses and headed over to the castle. Now the last brother, by the name of Claude Hans, also wanted to try and capture the heart of the princess, so he headed over on his goat and picked up some items along the way. No, not roses and chocolate, but a crow, a boot, and mud. Who doesn't love those items? I mean, come on. Although his brothers made fun of him, turns out Claude Hans won the princess over. How did this happen? Well, basically the princess was roasting a rooster, and Hans said that he could roast his crow in the boot and use the mud as gravy. Mmm, delicious. Well, apparently the princess liked how witty this was and they got married. The end. Definitely a strange story. Actually, this story is said to be loosely based off his life. Apparently he was made fun of as a kid and was an outcast. This also explains why the character was named Hans.
Coming into number 10, we have Pinocchio. All Pinocchio wants to do is be a real boy, but that is not happening in Carlo Collodi's original version of the tale. In the 1800s version of the tale, Pinocchio kills Jiminy Cricket by throwing a hammer at him. Why? Well, he's angry at the cricket for being a bit of a know-it-all, so he batters him. He doesn't even really feel that bad about it, to be honest. He then falls asleep by the fire and his feet burn off, but it's alright because good old Geppetto builds him some new ones. Then, naughty Pinocchio is hung from a tree and suffocates. The moral of the story? Disobey and die. One way to scare the kids into good behaviour, I guess. Coming into number 9, we have Sleeping Beauty. So the original tale of Sleeping Beauty is a story called The Sun, Moon and Talia, and is like Sleeping Beauty about a princess that falls into a deep sleep. Okay, at first, the similarities are on point. Instead of being prophesied to prick her finger on a spindle and spinning wheel, it's flax and hemp that are a problem. The girl does get flax stuck under her fingernail and falls into a deep sleep. Her rich father has her enshrined in a mausoleum in the woods, where one day an older king from another kingdom finds her. He then rapes her corpse and leaves her. She then gives birth and fairies look after her babies until one day one of her kids sucks the flax out from under her fingernail and she wakes up to 2 surprises. She names her kids Sun and Moon, as they, like the celestial bodies, are a mystery to her. The rapey and older king returns to find her awake and they fall in love, which is really weird. The only problem is, other than the rape, is that he has a wife. His wife then finds out and orders her chef to cook her husband's kids and kill the mistress, but he manages to find out first and kill her. The king, Talia, Sun and Moon live happily ever after. Isn't that nice? Coming into number 8, we have Cinderella. Cinderella is a heartwarming rags to riches tale, and yeah, the version we know today is sad, what with Cinderella being an orphan and everything, but beyond that, Cinders does get a benevolent fairy godmother who helps her deal with her sisters and wicked stepmother. It all works out alright in the end though. That slipper fits and she marries her prince. Okay, sure, but in the origin version, her ghastly sisters chop parts of their own feet off to be able to fit in the slipper. The prince only finds out when he finds blood in the shoe. Eventually he does find out that Cinderella is the true owner of the slippers and they get married, but that isn't all. Doves peck out her older sister's eyes. Hip hip hooray. Coming in at number 7, we have Snow White. So we all love a bit of Snow White, right? In the story we know and love, Snow White is a princess with a wicked wicked stepmother who forces her out of her home because she's jealous of her beauty. She meets 7 kindly dwarves in the woods who take care of her, but when the wicked stepmother finds out she's still alive, she tries to poison her. Later, she's awoken by a prince with a true love's kiss. Things weren't so cutesy in the original Brothers Grimm tale. Snow White is indeed cast out, but the wicked stepmother, Queen of the Kingdom, asks a huntsman to murder her in the woods and bring back her heart and lungs so she can eat them. The huntsman does spare her, but the queen finds out and eventually tries to kill her 3 times. Eventually, she gatecrashes Snow White and the prince's wedding and is then forced to put on a pair of burning hot iron shoes that have been in a fire all day, and then she's forced to dance in them until she dies. Her flesh is immediately badly burned, but she eventually drops dead of exhaustion. Honestly, that sounds more like the origin story behind the Red Wedding than a beloved fairy tale. Coming into number 6, we have the Goose Girl. I hadn't heard of the Goose Girl, but I hear it's a very popular tale in Germany and Eastern Europe after doing a bit of research. It's a bedtime fairy tale and its origins are the stuff of nightmares. To cut a long story short, in the original tale, a deceitful maid is thrown into a barrel with spikes and rolled around till she dies. Some classic medieval torture. It does sound particularly grim. Is it worse than being hung, drawn and quartered, or better? What about being pulled apart by horses? Coming into number 5, we have Hansel and Gretel. There are kind of 2 twisted origin stories here that merge to create one tale, told verbally for hundreds of years, but first written down by the Brothers Grimm. So back in medieval Germany, where the tale is set, there were widespread famines and people simply could no longer provide for their children, so they abandoned them, leaving them to die alone in the woods, possibly from starvation, or maybe by being savaged by animals. This legit happened in history. The next part of the tale comes from the story of a pair of rival bakers. One of them had the misfortune of being a woman. Katharina Schraderin was well known for her incredible gingerbread in her German village in the 1600s. A competing male baker became jealous of her success, so played on a timeless trend of smearing the women with nasty rumours. What could he do in the 1600s? Well, he called her a witch. In accusing her, he convinced others to track her down. The posse then rounded her up and burned her to death in her very own baker's oven. Right. Coming into number 4, we have Mulan. The original Mulan was written by Chi Reno and was called The Ballad of Hua Mulan. Any ballad can't be a good thing. Hua Mulan was a legendary Chinese woman. In the ballad, like in the fairy tale, she disguises herself as a man in order to join the army, and she falls in love with Luo Cheng. When she comes back from war, she discovers that her father has died and her mum has remarried. Not only that, the man who waged the war in the first place has called for her to be his concubine, so basically his sex slave. Instead of doing that, she commits suicide, but before she does, she gets her sister to dress as a man and send a letter to Liu Chang. Her sister does, but then ends up sleeping with him herself. Horrifying. Coming into number 3, we have Red Riding Hood. The story of Red Riding Hood that we know and love today includes a grandma, a wolf, and a little girl and a hunter. Despite a few darker undertones, the story has a happy ending and Red Riding Hood is reunited with her grandma and the big bad wolf is killed. Not so much in the original, however. In the earliest versions, which were said to originate in Italy and were said to be named things like the story of grandmother or false grandmother, actually things are pretty gnarly. In these early versions, while it was usually a wolf that did the taunting, some actually had vampires or ogres after the little girl. In the origin tales, the wolf does kill the grandmother and then gets Red Riding Hood to unwittingly eat her body and drink her blood. He then strips the girl naked, forces her to burn her clothes, and then makes her get into bed with him. In most of the old stories, he eats her, but in some, well, it's worse. Coming into number 2, we have the Pied Piper of Hamelin. So we know the story of the Pied Piper. It's a popular but admittedly dark fairy tale in which a town in Lower Saxony, Germany is infested with rats, as it probably would have been in the Middle Ages. Enter the Pied Piper, a man with a magical pipe who does a deal with the town mayor to lure all of the rats away. He does this successfully and the town is rid of the rodents. However, the mayor refuses to pay, so the Pied Piper uses his magic pipe to lead away all of the town's children in revenge. Well, it turns out the dark origin here is that it's actually true. Surviving town records from the church in Hamelin say that in the year of 1284, on the day of St. John and Paul on June 26. By a piper clothed in many kinds of colours, 130 children born in Hamelin were seduced and lost at a place of execution near the Koppen. It is thought that the children were taken as part of the Children's Crusade, and the whole business with the rats was added later. Some even say that the real piper was a paedophile who abducted the children in their sleep. Finally, honestly, I don't think it gets darker or scarier than this. We have Ariel the Little Mermaid. Hands down, the origin story to the Little Mermaid is absolutely horrifying. Hans Christian Andersen's original tale was gruesome. I hope you're ready for it. Instead of a princess mermaid falling in love, exchanging her voice for legs, and marrying a prince to live happily ever after, the origin was fraught with bad decision making and utter heartbreak. The mermaid is indeed a princess and does indeed save the life of a prince she falls for. She also makes a bargain with a sea witch in exchange for legs so she can meet him, only the original version is much more intense. The sea witch takes the mermaid's tongue and gives her legs. Every time she walks though, she feels the pain of walking on knives and sticking her leg through swords. Unfortunately, this has the effect of making her feet bleed regularly. She's told if she doesn't secure the love of a prince, she will die. She meets the prince who asks her to dance for him, which she does even though it causes her pure and utter agony. He then falls in love with someone else, breaking her heart. Her mermaid sisters have her back. They sell their lovely hair to the sea witch for a knife that offers the mermaid a way out. If she kills the prince and drips his blood on her legs, she can end her pain and become a mermaid again. Sadly for her, she loves him way too much, and instead, as the witch promised, she dies. She simply ceases to exist. Right, not so great then.
Coming in at number 10, we have Die Greciet von Beißen Frederik. Our next story translates to either cruel or wicked Frederick. I think it depends on what era you're born in, but this story is pretty much about a sociopath in the making. The story starts with cruel Frederick running around killing birds, just random birds that he finds. He finds them and he kills them and he rips their wings off. And this isn't even to eat them, he just wants to kill them for his own sick pleasure.
No, you need help. I need help?
Who does that? And the story only gets worse from there. He starts to destroy furniture, and then he finds some poor lady named Mary and he starts whipping her. First of all, what is wrong with this kid? And second of all, why on earth does this kid have a whip? Who gives a kid a whip? Then there's a dog that shows up at this kid's house and he starts whipping the dog. And then the dog gets pissed and it mauls cruel Frederick's leg. And then the story ends with him in bed because his foot is infected and the dog is sitting at the dinner table eating his food. So I guess the moral of the story is don't be an evil child of Satan or you'll get attacked by wild animals and maybe starve to death. Next on the list we have Struwwelpeter. This story translates to Shaggy Peter. And while being shaggy now in this day and age with ripped jeans and face tattoos is hip and cool, back when this story was written in 1845, they didn't feel the same way. Well, maybe that was just Germany. I don't know if there's a bunch of people running around with face tattoos in the 1800s in New England, who knows. But this story is about a boy who gets too damn shaggy. He never wants to groom himself, he has fingernails that grow super long and his hair needs to be brushed, but it's also so long because he never cuts it. Also, the story specifically talks about how he's covered in soot. I don't really think that's a problem anymore. I think the equivalent to being covered in soot is like being covered in Cheeto dust. The modern version of this story should be Cheeto Dust Charlie and the sticky fingers that ruined his Xbox controller. Someone in the comments please tell me how to say that in German. But pretty much what happens to old Shaggy Peter is that no one likes him. He stinks, he's hairy, he's got fingernails so long he could scratch his next door neighbor's ear holes. So the moral of the old tale is be clean or people won't like you. In 1845, we hadn't started telling kids that it's what's on the inside that counts.
You're ugly.
Coming in at number 8, we have Fidgety Phillips. This story is a warning to kids who can't sit still at the dinner table. But before I dive into this one, don't forget to like this video. The story goes that young Philip is at the dinner table with his parents and is being pretty rambunctious. Eventually, after moving around way too much, he ends up tipping his chair over. In his fall, he ends up bringing the entire dinner table and everything on it down with him and makes a complete mess. He is under the tablecloth with all of the dinner scraps over top and all around him. His parents are of course extremely upset at him for ruining all their plates and glasses and the dinner that they had made for everyone. The boy ended up not getting to eat dinner and had to go hungry that day. If you take anything from this story, just make sure you're minding your manners at the dinner table. Moving on to our number 7 spot, we have the story of Augustus who wouldn't have any soup. This story is about a boy named Augustus who was a healthy little boy with round cheeks. Augustus never had a problem eating and also ate whatever he was told to and never let his soup get cold. But one winter day, something changed in Augustus. When his soup was placed in front of him that day, he threw a tantrum and refused to eat it. He threw his spoon across the room and yelled to get that nasty soup away from him. The next day he was visibly thinner from not getting his nutrients, but he still refused to eat his soup. The next day the same thing, and the days that followed. He was withering away in front of everyone's eyes. On the 4th day he was so thin he hardly outweighed a sugar plum. The story takes a dark turn on the 5th day when he ends up being found dead.
At number 6 we have Die Griechet von Fliegenden Robert. This one is the story of Flying Robert. He goes out during a rainy day and he has his umbrella and he ends up floating away. And the last line of the story is literally, he was never seen again. The moral of the story is to tell kids not to go outside when it's gross and rainy outside, but how harsh does the story have to be? The kid couldn't just come home with a cold and get a little sick and then get better. No, he had to float away from the wind, picking him up by his umbrella, and then he would vanish from society. Jesus.
In our number 5 spot, we have the Girl Without Hands story. This story is about a father who gets offered money by a strange man. The man tells the father that if he gives him whatever is standing behind the mill, then he will give him the money. Unbeknownst to the father, this strange man is actually the devil. The man agrees because he believes that there is only an apple tree standing behind the mill, but to his unfortunate surprise, his daughter was actually standing behind it. When the devil goes to take the daughter away, she fights back. She is so pure that she is able to resist his grip, but the devil still wants to take something with him. He tells the father and daughter that he will leave if the father will chop off his daughter's hands to give to him. Of course, at first they said absolutely not, but then the devil threatened to take the father away if they didn't agree. So unfortunately, that father and daughter had no choice and were forced to chop off her hands. I definitely don't want to go to sleep after hearing that one.
At number 4 we have Die Griechet von den Wilden Jäger. Also, if I'm pronouncing these wrong, I want to apologize to everyone watching the video. This translates to the story of the Wild Huntsman. This is a tale about a dude who wanted to head out and hunt some rabbit for his dinner. While he was out hunting, the day gets super hot and this dude was like, why should I hunt in the sun when I can just take a nap and start hunting again later? Smart dude. Well, it turns out not so smart. When he was sleeping, the rabbit steals his gun and his glasses and then starts shooting at him. He starts running away in terror because the rabbit is trying to kill him and he can barely see without his glasses. The huntsman manages to run back to his cottage where his wife is waiting for him. His wife hears a ton of commotion and comes out to see her husband being hunted by a rodent. In a final attempt to survive, the huntsman jumps down a well and his wife screams in terror and drops her coffee on her foot and burns herself, and the rabbit and the rabbit's baby celebrate. I don't even know what the moral of the story is. Don't sleep on the job or animals will gain sentience and try to murder you in front of your loved ones.
In our number 3 spot, we have Max and Moritz. This story is about 2 little rascals who like to pull pranks. In the story, they pull off 7 different pranks. Some of their pranks include stealing a widow's chicken, breaking a bridge and then making the tailor walk over it so that he falls into the river below, and filling a teacher's pipe with gunpowder so that when he lights it, it blows up in his face. Needless to say, these boys are pretty reckless and pretty cruel. Eventually, someone decides it's time to prank the boys back, but this is where things take an even darker turn. This prank ends up being less of a prank and more of an extremely severe punishment. The boys end up getting baked into bread and fed to the chickens. I can't believe that this is actually a story told to children. The boys did play some pretty harmful pranks, but I'm not sure if this extent was necessary. I guess it's a lesson to to be kind and treat others well.
At number 2 we have Daigo Torre Grishitimi Priorzig. There's my German, I'm killing it. Killing it at German today, my German's the best. This translates to a very sad story with matches. And it's about a girl named Harriet who is left home alone. Her parents have a box of matches on the countertop and tell her not to touch them, but this little girl loves fire. And so the girl doesn't listen to her parents and she lights a match anyways. And then her clothes light on fire and she burns until there's nothing left but her smoldering ashes on the ground. And then her cats cry a stream of tears out of their face, and that's the end. That's the end of the story. The lesson is obviously don't play with matches, and the secret message is how you give a child a lifelong fear of fire.
In our number 1 spot today, we have the story of Little Suck a Thumb. This story starts off with a mom leaving her young son Conrad at home. She explains that she needs to leave for a little while, but warns him not to suck his thumb while she is away or else. She says that the great tall tailor always finds little boys who suck their thumbs and takes big sharp scissors and cuts them off, and explains that thumbs can't grow back. The mom leaves, and then almost immediately after, the boy begins sucking his thumb. He had been warned, but absolutely did not listen. Soon, the door flew open and a tailor began running in with scissors. I'm not sure why the tailor cares so much about it, but he ends up chasing the boy around and snipping off his thumbs. When the mom comes home, she sees the boy standing there, and apparently he just looks sad. I feel like I would be a lot more than sad if somebody cut off my thumbs, but I guess it is just a story. The mom then says she knew that the tailor would come to naughty little Suck a Thumb, which seems like kind of an insensitive response.
Starting off at number 10, Rumpelstiltskin. So you probably heard this one growing up, or at least the name tossed around. Basically, a king finds out a girl can spin straw into gold, even though she can't, locks her up into a room and says, do it, spin some straw into gold for me, or you die. And so a creature decides to help her in return for gifts, and she eventually promises this creature man her firstborn kid. And so the king marries her, being like, you can spin straw into gold? Wild. Then they have a baby, and the creature man thing says, you can keep your baby if you can guess my name in 3 days. This creature, of course, is Rumpelstiltskin, which is a lovely name. But the now queen now overhears him saying his name, so she guesses right, and he is so mad he tears himself in half. Specifically, he plunged his right foot so deep into earth that his whole leg went in, and then in rage he pulled at his leg so hard with both hands that he tore himself in 2. Yeah, so fairy tales, woo! Ripped in half. On to number 9, Rapunzel. In this tale of Rapunzel and the Brothers Grimm version, Rapunzel is not the princess. She's actually the firstborn of a woman that had a craving for the lettuce type that is called Rapunzel. And this woman told her husband that if she didn't eat some of this, she would die, which is relatable. So her husband stole that lettuce called Rapunzel enough time that the enchantress that grew the lettuce said, oh boy, you shouldn't do that or I'll take your firstborn child. So he looked at the lettuce, looked at the enchantress and said, deal, and the couple gave the baby to the enchantress later on, because we just want some lettuce, obviously. Anyways, fast forward through Rapunzel up in the tower, letting her hair down for Gothel, all that. One day a prince comes along and hears Rapunzel singing, and he calls up to her to let her hair down, and they start hanging out. Tinder could never. So even with all that, Gothel does find out, cuts off Rapunzel's hair, and then leaves her in the desert. Then she waits in the tower for the prince and says, boy, Rapunzel's gone, you'll never see her again. And then the prince is so beside himself in agony that he throws himself out the tower. He survived the 20-story fall, but he landed in bushes where thorns pierced into his eyes and he was blinded. He roamed around blind for years to come until he stumbled upon the familiar voice of Rapunzel. Her tears healed his eyes, and they went back to his kingdom with their twins, and they lived happily ever after. So in 3 words, this story is kidnapping, blindness, and lettuce. On to number 8, Thumbling. So this is Thumbling, not Thumbelina. In this one, a couple has a child that is so tiny and it never grows bigger, but they love their son Thumbling anyways. Wholesome beginnings, I love it. But then some people find out and they say they will buy Thumbling since they think they will make a load of money parading him around. So the dad is like, no, I don't want this, I love my son, but Thumbling is a bit of a trickster and says, take the money, dad, I'll find my way back. Thumbling does find his way back, but only after running away from the people who bought him, being eaten by a cow, cut out of the cow, then eaten by a wolf, and then tricking the wolf to eat at his parents' house, and then his parents kill the wolf and cut him out of the wolf. And then he's like, I made it back. What an entrance. It is a happily ever after, but gruesome. I feel like they cut into so many animals in these. You'll see, there's more. Bringing us next to number 7, Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel, if you will. German names, you can tell. Origins, the Grimm brothers. Brothers Grimm. So this one starts right into it. The family is so poor they don't have enough to eat, so the stepmother in the family turns to the father and says, let's leave them out into the forest, give them each a piece of bread, and leave them. And she keeps bugging him until he relents and says, I'll do it, but I won't be happy about it. So they do their plan, but Hansel left a trail of light rocks so they could find their way back to the house. So then the parents go through the same argument and do the same plan later, but this time Hansel didn't have time to gather rocks, so he left little trails of bread instead. But bread didn't really stay put, pigeons and other birds kind of took it and were like, lunch. So they didn't have their way back. So then Hansel and Gretel are 2 or 3 days wandering in the forest and come upon, boom, the witch in the beautiful house made of candy and goodies. And I feel like we all know this part. The witch starts out nice, uses Gretel to help her cook the meals, and then trying to fatten Hansel up to eat him. But then she gets impatient, lights an oven, is like, Gretel, you should crawl in and see if it's, warm yet. And Gretel's like, I know what you're trying to do. I don't know how to get into the oven. So then the witch peeks their head in, Gretel shoves them in the oven, boom, locks it up, burns the witch alive. Because this is how fairy tales go, apparently. And yet, they listen to the witch scream until their screams ring out and the witch is dead. They take the riches from the witch's house, go home, and their dad is just there and the stepmother's dead. With no explanation. In 3 words, this one is deceit, de witch, and de death. Let's move on to number 6, Cinderella. This Cinderella is pretty similar in both versions, but it's just a bit more grim in the Grimm version, First of all, the stepsisters in the Grimm version are not outwardly ugly in this one. They're beautiful, just horrible people. The stepmother and stepsisters make Cinderella's life miserable until her fairy godmother steps in. And in this version, her fairy godmother is a magical tree with little birds. Then much the same happens with Cinderella going to the ball, making the prince swoon, and living a shoe that is so small because she has such tiny little feet. Then, because the stepsisters wanted to marry into royalty so bad, they did what they could to get into the shoe. One cut off a toe and one cut off a heel. Just like, oh, I really want this, I'm just gonna cut parts of my feet off? I don't know. The prince notices when blood is rushing out of the shoe and is like, I don't think you're the person. I don't recognize your face or your feet. One apparently is more important than the other. Oh, and also at the very end of the story, the stepsisters try to weasel their way back into Cinderella's good graces and get their eyes pecked out by pigeons. So this one in 3 words, labor, feet, and karma. Moving on to number 5, Frog Prince, which you may think about Princess and the Frog similar. So in modern versions of this tale, the spell on the Frog Prince is broken by a kiss from the princess, or even by spending 3 days on the princess's pillow. But did you know the real origins? In the original, the princess becomes so frustrated and disgusted that she throws the frog against a wall, and then he's revealed to be a prince. So first just like brutally throwing this frog, and then a prince. This is supposed to be a fairy tale? Great metaphor, obviously. You don't yeet a frog and then get a prince. That doesn't make sense. On to number 4, Little Snow White, aka Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. So a queen had Snow White and died while she was born. Then the king took another wife who was really vain, and that queen spoke into a mirror that told her that she was the fairest of them all. And so this happened until Snow White grew up and the mirror said Snow White was more beautiful, so then the new queen hated her. And this is supposed to be her stepmom. Grimm brothers got a thing against stepmoms, I feel. So anyways, this queen told the huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and cut out her heart and bring it back. So he was going to, and then he was like, ugh, I can't, cut out the heart of a wild boar instead and brought that to the queen. The queen, thinking it was Snow White's heart, got the cook to cook it for her and then ate it. Just like, yeah, what? No. Anyways, Snow White meets up with the dwarves, yada yada yada, becomes their housemaid for safety, food, and a place to stay. But then, Queen finds out, dresses up as a witch, tries to kill Snow White 3 times, one with a really tight corset, one with a poisoned comb, and then finally, poisoned apple. So yes, Snow White was as good as dead. The dwarves put her in a glass coffin and then on a mountain with at least one dwarf watching out for her. Just kinda unique, but I'll go with it. But then a king's son found her and asked if he could buy her in the coffin from the dwarves. Just buying a dead body, not suspicious at all. They said no. But then the prince asked if he could have her as a gift, just like he would treasure her, and they said yes. So not for the money, but for just the niceness. Anyways, while carrying the glass coffin, some of his guards I assume, the poison apple dislodged from her throat when the coffin fell, and then she was back to life, and then her and the prince wed. Romance at its finest, I know. At the wedding, the evil queen had to dance in iron shoes that were molten hot until she dropped dead. On to number 3, the donkey. So you've heard of Donkey from Shrek, but have you heard of the Donkey? This one's a roller coaster, so strap in, I will stick to the main points. A king and queen had a kid, but it came out as a donkey. The queen was not having it, but the king decided they should raise this donkey as they would a child. So this noble donkey grows up well-mannered and even mastered the lute. It's kinda wild, but I like it. And it gets wilder. So the donkey travels to another kingdom, befriends the king, marries the princess, and is found out by the servant that is spying on the donkey on behalf of the king that the entire time it's been a man in a donkey suit. Yep, entire time a man dressing up as a donkey. That means since birth, this man has been dressing up as a donkey, taking all the ridicule that comes with it, and making an ass out of himself. Literally. The king burns the donkey skin suit and says, "Live your truth, man." So in the end, Donkey Man gets his wife's kingdom when her father dies, his own kingdom, and just has everything he wants, and he's no longer in a donkey skin suit. Please tell me what you think the moral of this story is down below. Number 2, the mouse, the bird, and the sausage. So a mouse, a bird, and a sausage are all living together as a cohesive household unit. Bird gets the wood for the fire, mouse gets the water, lights the fire, and sets the table, and then the sausage cooks for them to all eat well. When the sausage cooks, they even dip themselves into the pot to add a little bit of seasoning. Then one day they try to switch it up, but the sausage gets eaten by a dog while it tries to get the wood for the fire. The mouse goes into the pot to try to season it, just like sausage, but it dies, and then the bird falls into the well while trying to get water. I think this story is trying to say stick to what you're good at, but that doesn't seem like the best moral of a story. Leave that one to you again. Lastly, let's move on to number 1, Little Red Cap, which is a variation of Little Red Riding Hood, possibly. There is another variation by Perrault called Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, which is a different tale, but today we were talking about the Grimm stories, so let's go into this one anyways. In this one, it is not a Red Riding Hood, but it is a velvet red cap, which I say, all the more fashion. So Little Red runs into the wolf while on her way to give her ill grandmother cake and wine. That's what heals me as well. The wolf gets directions to her grandmother's house from Little Red and then points out some flowers to distract her. As she's distracted, he runs over to grandma's, eats her, and then Red comes and he is in full granny costume until she comes close and then he eats her as well. After that, he's so full that he falls asleep and snores just really loud. I would too. Anyways, he snores so loud that a huntsman hears him and, get this, the huntsman realizes the wolf probably ate grandmother, so he cuts open his stomach with scissors until both Little Red Riding Hood and the grandmother come out. They now fill his open stomach with stones, and at this point he is still somehow sleeping. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper too, so I kinda get it. Anyways, he tried to get up but was so heavy he fell dead. So then the huntsman skinned the wolf for the fur, the grandma ate cake and drank wine and felt better, and everyone just kind of happily ever after and learned their lesson to not stray from the main road.